What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Cosmic Wonder, where we talk all things Marvel and MCU. And if you thought that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness was pretty creepy, well, it was actually supposed to be creepier than what we saw. That's right, the original script for Doctor Strange 2 was creepier than what we saw on this screen, and it originally had a different villain. Now, most people know that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness originally had a different director, Scott Derrickson. He directed the first Doctor Strange film and was set to direct the second, and he really pushed for this to be Marvel's first horror movie. He had a whole script pretty much entirely done. But from what we know, unfortunately, there were a little bit of creative differences between him and Marvel Studios, based on him wanting it to be a lot more creepy than Kevin Feige wanted it to be. But we recently found out a little bit about that trashed script from the actual Doctor Strange 2 writer Michael Waldron, including talks about who the villain was, and no, it wasn't originally going to be Wanda. We also have some news about some scenes that took place in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and how Kevin Feige wanted them in the movie, and these scenes connect to a particular X-Men, one who actually had a cut scene in Multiverse of Madness that unfortunately we never saw. And I'm sad to say that that person was Magneto. I'm sure everybody would have loved to have seen him in the movie and would have loved to see a connection between Magneto and Wanda, since there is a comic storyline where Magneto is Wanda's father. So let's break down what the original script was, how the pandemic affected it, and what we could have originally got, which was an MCU where the Scarlet Witch was not a villain. So let's dive into it, and of course, if you're new, be sure to subscribe so you can stay up to date on all the latest videos. So I think a lot of people know that Nightmare was originally supposed to be the villain for Multiverse of Madness. But I think a lot of people thought that once Sam Raimi and Michael Waldron got involved after Scott Derrickson left, that's when everything changed. However, we have recently learned that that wasn't exactly the case. When Sam Raimi originally came on, he was still working with the script that Scott Derrickson made, and Nightmare was still going to be the main villain. However, the pandemic changed all of that, and we learned about this in a recent interview with Michael Waldron. He talked about how they needed a more multiversal adversary for Doctor Strange to face rather than somebody like Nightmare. And this is how the Scarlet Witch became the villain of Doctor Strange 2. Something that became kind of controversial. But here's what Michael Waldron said in an interview with Den of Geek. When talking about the original script, he said, "There was different stuff. I think it's been reported that once upon a time, there was some talk of Nightmare and stuff like that. But when I came on board, it was a multiverse story, and so it was always about trying to figure out who that multiversal adversary was going to be." So right away he says people heard about Nightmare being the original villain. However, when he came on board, they began to talk about possibly changing the villain to somebody who was more multiversal. He continues to say, "When I originally came on in February of 2020, Sam and I inherited the story that had been worked on by Scott Derrickson and Jade Bartlett, the original writer on the project. It had a lot of really cool ideas in it, and we were initially going to just try and figure out our version of that story in time to start shooting the movie in May. Then COVID happened a month later and the movie was pushed, which afforded us an opportunity to kind of start over and re-examine what we wanted the movie to be. So COVID was actually responsible for Doctor Strange 2 getting pretty much completely reworked. Originally, the movie was supposed to be about Nightmare being the villain, and it would have some multiversal aspects to it. But COVID allowed Michael Waldron and Sam Raimi to write a completely new script, which I think is good because I think the multiverse is going to be a huge part of the MCU moving forward. And if we are getting Secret Wars in maybe 4 years from now, which I hope we are, we needed the events of Doctor Strange 2 to happen the way that they did. We needed to see, spoiler alert, the Illuminati, and we needed to hear Reed Richards talk about how incursions happen, because that's how Secret Wars happens. Universes collide. And this is what they wanted. Michael Waldron continues to say, "It meant that Steven would have had some real experience with the multiverse by now, that he had been on a multiversal adventure already. This isn't his first rodeo, so to speak, so that kind of recontextualizes the way you approach all of this. He understands the dangers of it more." Now, of course, what he's talking about here is Spider-Man No Way Home. He had just dealt with the multiverse in No Way Home, so he was somewhat familiar with the multiverse and the dangers that accompanied it. But originally, this was supposed to come out before No Way Home, so they had to change the script. So the original script was going to deal with Nightmare, but it was also going to be Doctor Strange's first dealings with the multiverse. So if COVID wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have gotten the Illuminati, which is probably, and debatably, the best part of Multiverse of Madness, even though the Scarlet Witch wiped the floor with them. So here's where the big question comes in. Would it have been better if we got the original script for Multiverse of Madness? We would have had less multiverse adventures, but the Scarlet Witch would not have been the villain, and she would still be a hero in the MCU. Her future would have been totally different. She could have still been a part of the Avengers, which now is kind of questionable since, of course, Wong is the Sorcerer Supreme. He might have a problem with her joining the Avengers. When she comes back, because let's face it, there's no way she's dead, Strange and Wong are going to be keeping an eye out on her, probably pretty closely. Now, I personally really enjoyed seeing the Scarlet Witch at her full power, and even though I do fully believe that she is returning, how she's going to return and what her future is very unknown right now. So let me know right now in the comments if you would have liked her to not be the villain and would have had her remain a hero. And keep in mind there's always redemption for people. It'll take some really good writing, but of course she can return and still be a hero. And now to talk about a really interesting X-Men scene in Multiverse of Madness, which didn't actually involve the X-Men. It's the scene where Doctor Strange and America Chavez travel through a bunch of different universes in the span of, 20 seconds, 40 seconds? They visit a lot of universes in that time frame, and one of them is the Savage Lands, a tropical jungle hidden in Antarctica that's also a prehistoric land because it has dinosaurs in it. But the biggest thing is that at one point in time, Magneto claims the land as his own and he builds a base there, and then the X-Men come and they battle. It's a big storyline, and the Savage Lands is mostly connected with Magneto and the X-Men. And as it turns out, Kevin Feige, the president of Marvel Studios, is actually the person who's said to put this in the movie. In a recent interview with the visual effects team, they told us about Kevin Feige wanting the Savage Lands in the movie when they said they proposed a jungle, and Kevin Feige said, well, it would be cool if it was Savage World. So they put it in the movie at Kevin Feige's request. We also got word that there was a deleted scene with Magneto. The deleted scene apparently showed him as Wanda's father in this universe, the Earth 838 universe. Once the Illuminati learned about dreamwalking and what the Scarlet Witch could do, they wanted to perform a lobotomy on the Scarlet Witch of that universe to make sure she wasn't ever strong enough to dreamwalk. But they had to consult with her father, Magneto, first. So that was supposed to be in the film, and now we know that Kevin Feige wanted the Savage World in Multiverse of Madness, a place that is heavily related to the X-Men. Now in 2019, Kevin Feige announced that the X-Men, or mutants, were coming pretty soon. He also announced that the Fantastic Four were coming pretty soon, and we got Reed Richards in Multiverse of Madness. So I'm assuming and hoping that the X-Men are coming sooner than later in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, hopefully within the next couple of years. I'm also hoping that we get the cosmic entities in the MCU pretty soon, and it's looking like that might actually be the case. You may have also noticed that one of the universes that they go through is a universe where we can see the Living Tribunal. And as it turns out, that was also at the request of Kevin Feige. When the visual effects team was talking about the worlds and universes they created, they said one was an Incan statue world, which ended up in the movie because Kevin Feige thought, well, that could be a great world to put the Living Tribunal in. So that world became the Living Tribunal world. Now, for those of you who may not be aware, the Living Tribunal is a cosmic entity that watches over the entire multiverse. And when things get too crazy, crazier than what we saw in Multiverse of Madness, he steps in. And he judges people based on their crimes against the multiverse. But here's the catch, he has 3 heads, and they all have to agree unanimously on the judgment. So if you're wondering why hasn't the Living Tribunal stepped in yet, it could be because 1, well, maybe something wasn't that big to interfere with yet, or 2, maybe all of the heads didn't agree. Because again, it has to be unanimous. But we've now seen several mentions and hints of the Living Tribunal in the MCU. In the first Doctor Strange, Mordo mentioned the Living Tribunal. We saw a statue of the Living Tribunal's head in Loki. Then we saw him in the recent Doctor Strange film, and we recently saw a statue of the Living Tribunal's head and other cosmic entities in the trailer for Thor: Love and Thunder. So I'm hoping that the cosmic entities are about to become a thing in the MCU. They play a major role in the comics, and it's looking like they're about to play a major role in the MCU. And since Thor: Love and Thunder is going to explore other gods, I'm hoping they take that opportunity to at least talk about cosmic entities. So that's it for all the latest news today about Multiverse of Madness. Be sure to let me know if you think Wanda should have remained a hero, or do you like what happened in Multiverse of Madness? Leave your thoughts down below in the comments, and don't forget to like this video and subscribe to stay up to date on all of the latest videos. Of course, for live updates, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter, and as always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.